And welcome back, guys. Earlier we've had really great match, but this time it is going to be South Korea and Puerto Rico. We are back. My name is JJ, and with me is Maeve. How are you doing? How was the last match?
That last match was super fun. Obviously really interesting to see a Ditto on the field, but we do have a really exciting match this round. I know everybody got a sneak preview of the team while we were at break, but it is one of those teams that I'm really loving right now in Series 10, that Groudon Cherim. So super excited to look forward and see that. But JJ, how are you feeling? How has everything been for you in this weekend? How is it all going? Are you excited for this?
Well, yeah, we have been playing a lot here and there, trying to study the games, and honestly, last week's games is really great as well. And now, for this week, I'm just really excited and stoked to see our matches for this time. So without further ado, let us showcase our players for this match. And here we have it, of course.
Yeah, so this group here is one of those really tough groups: South Korea, Spain, Puerto Rico, and Hong Kong. So again, we haven't had those updates yet with those points because this is still the very beginning of that first week, or the very end of that first week, so everything should be updated by tomorrow. But this is one of those groups that is very dangerous, this group 5. South Korea, Spain, both really good teams, both well-established teams. Puerto Rico as well, I think, has a lot of really good players, a lot of, some players that typically are players you might think to be American, like Quinton, who is one of those really talented seniors players, who's now moved up into the Masters division, which is really exciting to see. We'll have to jump though to the teams here for South Korea and Puerto Rico though, to see exactly how it's been going scoring wise. But South Korea is in the lead 5-2 here. So Puerto Rico, this is their last game, so they have to go for this win here just to be up on points to stay in the game moving forward.
Right, and of course, if South Korea is going to still win this one, I mean, they're just really proving themselves to be like one of the powerhouses that we have in our tournament. But here comes our players. Of course, it's going to be Jiseok and of course Alexavier. And here are the teams of our players. Of course, coming in from Alexavier, Álvarez is going to be the Groudon, Entei, Cherim, Rillaboom, Dragapult, and Stakataka. Just as you mentioned, one of your favorites for Series 10, babe.
Yeah, absolutely. That Cherim with the flower gift ability is something that I absolutely have been loving to see. And then this Dragapult as well, having that offensive pressure from the Dragapult, but also having I've seen this run as both a special Dragapult and a physical Dragapult on different teams. Mostly it's been running physical, but I know Jamie Boyd faced this team, but with a special Dragapult on that game that I commentated, which was enough to take out his Appleton. So it's interesting to see typically how this team's been running. That Choice Scarf Entei is a Pokemon that can be really tough to deal with, especially if you just let it start to steamroll you. And having that Sun is really nice as well. It's great synergy between that Groudon and that Entei. And then the Rillaboom as well is great for dealing with Pokemon like those Urshifu, or even like a Kyogre, which would love to wall through this team.
Right, and now going over to our next player, it is going to be Jiseok, of course, one of the finalists of a Players Cup. It is going to be the Incinerization. We have Suicune, we have Landorus Incarnate, not the Therian form, Rillaboom, and the Grimmsnarl.
Yeah, Landorus Incarnate here, again, like Jamie and I saw that last match, is a really powerful Pokemon with that sheer force ability. Suicune's a Pokemon I've really been loving to have that Tailwind utility in Series 10, and it's definitely just a bulkier Pokemon. Grimmsnarl for screens also really nice to have, especially if you're dealing with some extra strong Pokemon on the opponent's side, especially, a light screen's really great if you're dealing with something like a Xerneas, but if you're dealing with, the physical attacks of a Groudon that's set up with a Swords Dance, a Reflect is absolutely huge to keep the Pokemon on your side healthy.
Right, and I'm just really excited to see how this is going to turn in. Of course, we have the Groudon Cherim. We have the, Zashan here for the side of Jiseok, also known as Moloka. Of course, Alexavier, also known as Arekusabi for, the grassroots tournaments. But here we have it. Of course, Zashan with the Rusted Sword. Of course, we wanted Intrepid Sword ability for Zashan. But this is going to be interesting. Going to be a really interesting matchup. And I just wanted to see how this is going to unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. I really think that Zacian's not going to love taking some of these really strong fire type attacks from either the Entei or a Heat Crash from this Groudon. And you're going to have to be mindful of Precipice Blades as well. You know, you don't have any wide guard users on this team. You've got two different options for Fake Out, and being able to cycle in that Incineroar and get those attack drops off onto Pokemon like that Groudon. And even that Cherrim, you know, if that Cherrim's able to get that Solar Blade off, can be pretty powerful with that Flower Gift attack boost and the special defense boost as well. Another thing too, you know, if this Suicune typically is something that might be able to handle something like that Stack Attacka here, but you know, it's just one of those teams where you have a lot of different options for everything, but you have to put yourself in the right positions moving forward. You know, if you have that Incineroar in the back and you know you can U-turn, or sorry, you know you can parting shot your way out of there, or with the Rillaboom as well, you know, and you have to be just mindful of your positioning in this game here for exactly how you think you're going to win in your game plan end here. But look at this lead here, JJ.
Right, it is going to be the Groudon Cherrim. You just wanted to see that, Maeve. But of course, for Jiseok, it's going to be the Rillaboom. Sorry, not Rillaboom, but like the Lindor's Incarnate and the Grimmsnarl. This is Arikusabi versus Maluka. Let's have a champion time. And of course, Flower Gift is definitely going to boost that Groudon as well. And as you mentioned, you know, Jiseok here not having any wide guard is going to be definitely going to make Alexavier's a team quite a threat to Jiseok's team.
Yeah, absolutely. That Cherrim, I absolutely love it, is already dancing in the sun. The Landorus Incarnate here actually switches out, though, getting that Incineroar and getting that Intimidate off, getting that Fake Out pressure the next turn, all of these really great things to handle something like this Groudon or this Cherrim here, and also a boosted Flare Blitz is going to do a lot of damage to a Cherrim possibly in the future. This Groudon, though, gets that White Earth as its item, so not carrying something like a Life Orb here. Reflect goes up, though, for Alexavier's side from that Grimmsnarl. The Solar Blade from this Cherrim comes out right away, in fact, not seeing any other moves for the very first time. The Solar Blade, though, if this goes into that Incineroar slot, that's a great switch in because it's not going to be dealing super effective damage. In fact, it takes just a small amount of damage from this, but the Heat Crash as well from the Groudon. This is going into that Incineroar slot as well, does a very little damage, doesn't even get it down to half health from two very strong moves here. So great switch from Alexavier.
Right, and you know, at this point on, Jiseok is just really trying to be as aggressive as possible with, you know, starting off with the Solar Blade, going into Alexavier, and as you mentioned, it was actually quite a good switch in coming from Alexavier, trying to, you know, predicting that move, predicting how that is going to be quite a detrimental play if that actually hits into the side of Alexavier. But right now, let's find out what's going to be the play here for Jiseok. It's going to be after the aggression is the defensive side, goes in for a double protect at this point, and this is just going to be either a free turn for Alexavier, if not, you know, gets in some setups. But quite unfortunately, it is going to be one of those free defenses, free turn defense for Jiseok.
Yeah, and that extra double protect there to stop that Fake Out was really nice, but of course nothing really to capitalize. A foul play instead there, so no real no other possibility for something like a light screen here. Incineroar switches back, though. If it gets that Landorus out, which it does, this Landorus is the biggest threat for Jiseok's team, and Jiseok knows it, which is why he double targeted it. But if he goes again for the exact same moveset into this Landorus, that's going to be absolutely huge for this switch, because you know Alexavier wanted to get that Intimidate and that Fake Out cycled back in, especially because that White Herb went through. The Landorus, though, takes the Solar Blade like a champ, but we'll have to see exactly how well it takes this Heat Crash, of course. That Reflect was huge, but it is enough to keep that Landorus alive. The Grimmsnarl goes for the foul play here into this Groudon, which does take a pretty good chunk of damage. Grimmsnarl not known for being a big attacking presence on the field here. So a really great play, knowing that your threat is that Landorus, but that Reflect is absolutely huge here, stopping the Landorus from getting knocked out, allowing you to get something like an Earth Power off next turn into that Groudon.
Right, that is actually quite pretty huge for the side of Alexavier. You know, like as you mentioned, getting in that reflag, making sure that Landorus is going to be able to survive, or at least anyone from the team to survive, is really just a huge for them. Especially this is going to be quite a huge damage dealer, of course, coming in from Jiseok Lee. But if Alexavier's not going to have anything to heal that up, or try to mitigate that damage coming in from Jiseok Lee, then of course they would be the one having the quite a bad position here. But look at this right now; it is going to be quite a damage here for both of the Pokemon. But of course, foul play is still up in the side of Alexavier.
Yeah, that was a ton of damage. The foul play, of course, just did a smaller amount there to that Cherim. Still a really nice play. Having that protection there from that Precipice Blade by being that Landorus and flying is really nice, because you know that you can't get touched. Incineroar switches out here, once again getting that Intimidate, which is not going to be deactivated by that White Herb here, and have that Fake Out Pressure next turn that it didn't actually really capitalize on because of those two Protects. But you know that both of these Pokemon are carrying Protect, which Cherim uses right now, which means that it won't be able to Protect during a Fake Out next turn. The Thunder Wave, though, from the Grimmsnarl into that Cherim will not go through because of the Protect. Groudon goes for another Precipice Blades here. This will target both of the Pokemon, and it will not be able to knock out either of them, even though it is super effective. And the sun goes down, so that means that Cherim's Flower Gift is going to end this turn, so you're not getting that attack or special defense boost here. So now Jiseok possibly has to cycle in his sun. He also has to be careful about, dealing with something like a Fake Out. You've gotten so much pressure and damage off into 3 of Alexavier's Pokemon if you just continuously chip away at them, especially because we've only seen 2 Pokemon from Jiseok's side, and they're both looking relatively healthy right now.
Right, and for the side of Jiseok Lee, it's really interesting to see that it's they're not really in any bad position right now. They just need to be very aggressive, moving forward. But look at that, Polynflop is not going to have any switch outs here so far, but Groudon is of course still going to get in some damage here. Precipice Blade is going to definitely knock out this Incineroar. I believe this is also the last turn for that Reflect, and of course just going to be able to switch out the Groudon is going to get that Flower Gift back once again, and of course get some boosts as well, and removing that -1 over the Groudon as well, moving forward into the game and making sure that Jiseok still has the lead over sorry, not the lead, but rather the advantage over Alexavier.
Yeah, I do want to apologize, actually. We did realize that the overlays for the names and the Pokemon are switched, so we are fixing that right now. We are watching from Jiseok's side, so apologies once again. Jiseok then sends in that Zacian, gets that Intrepid Sword boost. This is the Pokemon that he had in the back, his very last Pokemon that we haven't seen yet. So Alexavier is on the opposite side here with that Groudon and that Cherim. So, of course, again, very sorry about that switch in here, but Alexavier is the one instead who has been keeping those last 2 Pokemon in the back secret, and if it is something that can do a lot of damage to the Zacian, like that Entei, especially if it is Scarfed, then it's going to be a really great position here for Alexavier moving forward, especially if he, this turn you can go for something like that Behemoth Blade, where you can also go for a Protect and try and let your Landorus take out this Groudon at the very end here, especially because, Alexavier isn't trying to switch out or get that Sun again. Zacian instead goes for a Behemoth Blade, though. This should pretty comfortably knock out either of these Pokemon on the field here. It goes into that Cherim slot, does enough just to get that knockout, so no more Flower Gift, no more worry about the Sun here. Only use for the Sun now is to boost those Fire type moves and not get that boost. Earth Power from the Landorus goes into the Groudon. This should be pretty comfortable as well. It does well over 50% of the damage. The Precipice Blades doesn't affect the Landorus, but it does of course hit that Zacian. Even with that lowered accuracy, does not do a whole lot, does under half, probably about a third of the HP on the Zacian. So this Groudon is going to be dealing with a lot of power output these next few turns, especially if you want to go for something. But you do have that Fake Out pressure from this Rillaboom here. So now we're finally starting to see what Alexavier has been carrying in the back.
Right, and of course it is going to be the Rillaboom, and what's really interesting here is Alexavier doesn't really need to switch in. I mean, of course, it would be much better if they're going to be removing that Sun when the Cherim was still up. But at this point, I think the play here is just going to be as aggressive as possible, get in the KOs over Jiseok Lee's side. But here he comes, gets the prediction, of course, of that Protect, and gets a Fake Out as well over that Zashan, and of course the Precipice Blade is going to deal a lot of damage over this Zashan, and just like that, maybe if there wasn't the minus on that attack, then maybe that would have been KO on Zashan. But as I mentioned, it is quite detrimental for the side of Alexavier, that minus on the attack. But it looks like that is going to be game number one. Jiseok doesn't have any response here for Alexavier in this game, so that's going to be game number one.
Yeah, going through that reflect was definitely tough there because that reflect just ended. That means that he knows that he's not going to be able to deal with another Precipice Blades or really any powerful move from that Rillaboom as well. If it goes for something like that Grassy Glide, that's going to very comfortably knock out that Landorus that had, 6 HP left? I think a light breeze could have, finished off that Landorus at the end of the game there. So still really great plays there by Alexavier, knowing that even though that Cherrim at the very beginning was more for those boosts, you were able to consistently get that damage out. You didn't go for a Swords Dance, didn't go for something anything really defensive, but just continued to put the pressure on with those Precipice Blades. And no amount of switching and fake outs can help with that if you just keep putting the pressure on over time, especially if Jiseok wasn't putting on the exact same amount of pressure. So there's a lot of interesting points here, especially with both of these teams, because you have that Cherrim, which again with that Flower Gift makes your Pokemon so bulky, but I still think we only saw 3 Pokemon there on Alexavier's side, so that last hidden Pokemon is a really great piece of knowledge to keep as well.
Right, it was just a Cherrim. We have the Cherrim, we have the Groudon, and then of course we also had the Rillaboom at the back, of course. But again, from the early turns, that Flower Gift, of course, boosting almost +1, almost as if giving +1 over the attack and special defenses of its allies, is really quite huge. Even with the Reflect, of course, the Precipice Blades is still dealing a lot of damage. Even with the Hit Crash, still dealing a lot of damage. And the matchup here is really interesting, since Alexavier's team is basically almost like a counter pick for Jiseok. It's as if, Alexavier is destined to go against Jiseok Lee. So let's find out what's going to be the adjustment here coming in from Jiseok Lee to go against Alexavier's teams.
Yeah, and especially too with these teams, you do have something that we said earlier, that Reflect was absolutely huge, but even if you lead that Incineroar now, because you know that Groudon is carrying that White Herb, and by getting rid of that as early as possible, especially if Alexavier goes for the exact same lead here with that Cherrim and that Groudon, by getting rid of that early and then still having that fake out pressure on that turn 1, you may be able to set yourself up into a more advantageous position. The Suicune with the Tailwind, I think, could also be really helpful. It is not going to, love taking that Solar Blade, so it may not be the best Pokemon to bring here. But having Tailwind as an option is something that you really should be considering as well for this game, because that Sun is making it, these Pokemon extremely powerful. So if you can get your moves off first, then you're going to be in a really good position. But especially, that Grimmsnarl, I think not able to get that Thunder Wave off, not able to get any real paralysis done. It got what its main goal was, which was to set up those reflects there. But it wasn't able. Foul Play is a very good move for Pokemon that are strong attackers. But if you're not able to do consistent damage, then you're going to be struggling and falling behind, especially against an offensive powerhouse like Alexavier's team.
Right, and here we have it. This is going to be game number 2. Alexavier Alvarez versus Jiseok Lee. It is South Korea versus Puerto Rico. Let's have a champion time. And this time it is going to be the Entei and Groudon lead. Might have been the last Pokemon at the back for Alexavier on game number 1, but what's consistent here is, of course, a drought coming in from the side of Alexavier. Now, for Jiseok Lee, it is going to be the Suicune and, of course, that of the Grimmsnarl.
Yeah, and the Suicune here as well as the switch up for Jiseok with that Grimmsnarl in the beginning. So once again, you can possibly look into getting a Reflect up here. You don't have that Flower Gift, so you know that you're not going to have as strong of attacks. If you can get that Reflect up, you won't be dealing with as much damage. But that Entei, if it is Scarfed, Entei is still such a powerful Pokemon. It can still do so much damage. So even if your priority here is to set up a Tailwind, you could still be taking damage from 2 pretty big attacks even after a Reflect. But instead, that Groudon will switch back here, brings out the Rillaboom, which Suicune is not not a fan of, as that Rillaboom can do that super effective damage with that Grassy Glide here, and does set that Grassy Surge up as well. So all of these Pokemon will be able to heal up a little bit each turn, which is going to make this a slower, bulkier game, especially if those screens go up. Grimmsnarl instead goes for a Thunder Wave onto the Entei, which is a really nice move here because that paralysis and slowing it down could be a really nice difference, especially towards the game. Suicune goes for a Scald here into the Rillaboom slot, so a nice switch, and that Rillaboom takes absolutely no damage, and it does not get burned, but we get the full paralysis from the Entei, so no big damage from that Entei here either.
Right, and you know, see, even when Scald here is dealing less of a damage, of course, less 50% of the damage, since there's the sun weather, it's still doing its own job. And of course, Grimmsnarl getting in the Thunder Wave, but just making sure that Entei is going to be the slower Pokemon here, just to prevent it from dealing damage early on in the game. And from here on out, I think Suicune could deal some damage over that of the Entei, making sure, I think the plan here is to just take out the Entei quite fast, quite quickly, and this is going to be a Sacred Fire, of course, coming in from Alexavier, going into the Suicune, not dealing a lot of damage, since it's not a very effective move. Of course, Fire type to Water type, but Scald is going to be used once again into Rillaboom, wanting that burned status, but that is not going to happen. Wood Hammer, however, is going to knock out the Suicune for the side of Jiseok Lee. And right now, we have here, of course, a foul play coming in from the Grimmsnarl, going over to Entei, dealing more than half health of a damage.
Yeah, so that goes into that Entei with a absolutely ton of damage there, so you can possibly just pretty comfortably assume that it is a physical attacker instead of something like that special, which I have seen a couple of times, but it is nice to just have that there just for confirmation. And that Suicune, though, does go down. It goes for two Scalds there. It doesn't get any burns, which is really what it was fishing for at that point, getting that burn onto that Rillaboom on the opponent's side, so it's not able to do as much damage. But that Scald damage really was being completely mitigated by that grassy terrain. It really only has a small amount of damage lost because that Scald damage was almost equivalent to what, the 1/16 that it gains back here. Zacian, of course, switches in for that downed Suicune, that knocked out Suicune slot here, while the Entei, you know, if it is paralyzed and it is going slower, this could be a really great way for the Zacian to take it out, especially if you go for something like that Reflect, now that you've baited out exactly that Entei is most likely a physical variant and not a special here. But it just depends exactly. The Entei instead will switch back, though. If this is that Groudon, it is not. It's the Cherrim. So the Cherrim did come to this game, so that most likely was that fourth slot in Alexavier's party there, getting that Flower Gift up, boosting the attack on this Rillaboom, and also boosting that special defense, who didn't have to suffer a burn, but a substitute from the Zacian, gonna get a substitute up, not gonna take any damage this turn, hopefully. But it is gonna deal with a U-turn, actually going into the Grimmsnarl from this Rillaboom, does a really good chunk of damage, though. So this Rillaboom, getting that fake out pressure back in once again, especially maybe allowing for something like that Groudon to come back out, or something, you know, with a little bit more fake out pressure here on Alexavier's side, just being able to switch that Rillaboom back in. The Groudon, of course, does come in. Groudon loves to sit in front of his Zacian.
Right, of course. That is going to happen. Of course, foul play right now into that of the Cherrim dealing a lot of damage, more than half here, but of course with the help of that Grassy Surge is going to just bring it back to more than a little more than of half. But now that the Groudon is up, Alexavier, as they say, why fix something that is not broken? Albeit, of course, changing a little bit of the the leads, it's still essentially almost the same Pokemon, the same team that they brought in from game number 1. Quite with a huge possibility, of course, as well as we didn't see the fourth Pokemon for Alexavier. But right now, it looks like Jiseok Lee is currently on the disadvantage side here, on the disadvantage field, as one Pokemon is now down. Grimmsnarl is not looking pretty great right now, but we are going to see some switch in here from Grimmsnarl going into that up. The Rillaboom trying to get in some fake up pressure, and maybe, of course, we have the Grassy Glide as well. But here we have Zacian going in for a Protect here. Definitely wants to survive with the Precipice Blades coming in from that Groudon. But of course, we have the Protect as well coming from Cherrim, not going to deal a lot of damage. And of course, we have the Precipice Blades right now into that up. The Rillaboom, still not enough, still not going to put it into half of a damage, half of health with that Precipice Blades. But in the next turn, of course, Cherrim at this point, I don't think that a Charm is going to be able to deal some damage, even with the Solar Blade here. But what we do know is we have the Puff here that might be able to help the Groudon just sustain itself.
Yeah, but the thing is, if this Charm is running something like a Pollen Puff, it will still be able to do that super effective damage to that Rillaboom while also helping with that Groudon. But we did see that Jiseok isn't actually carrying that Incineroar with the 4 Pokemon he has. So now Alexavier has seen all of the Pokemon on Jiseok's side, so he knows he doesn't have to worry about that Intimidate with his Groudon. So his Groudon can be pretty free to launch off some moves or go for something boosting and not having to worry about losing something like a Swords Dance boost here to that Intimidate and not have to worry about activating that white herb. So it's nice to know that you only have one fake out user on Jiseok's side. Charm will switch back here for Alexavier though, is going to bring in the Entei, so 2 fire type Pokemon against 2 Pokemon that don't want to deal with fire type moves here, not even worrying too much about a Pollen Puff. Groudon goes for the Protect here in case it's going to be dealing with something like that Behemoth Blade from Zacian. Rillaboom goes for the fake out into that protected Groudon slot, not obviously going to be doing any damage here, but the Zacian does come out, does go for that Behemoth Blade, could be into either one of these Pokemon, most likely into that Groudon because that's where that fake out was. Just kidding, the animation, I'm not paying attention. I'm thinking of Dynamax because it is such a beautiful animation. Is enough to knock out that Entei. Of course, apologies there, but it is enough to knock out that Entei, so a great target there from Jiseok. My brain is still thinking Dynamax. We are several series past it now.
Several weeks as well, but moving over, we have Alexavier now down with the first Pokemon, and of course we might be able to see the No. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think we're going to be able to see the Cherim this turn. Maybe we might see a switch in from the Groudon as the Sun is no longer out, and of course as well as a Grassy Surge. But of course, we still have that Pokemon at the back, so we could just return the Grassy Surge for this turn. But the Sun is going to be quite huge here for Alexavier if they're not going to be able to bring that up. And as you mentioned, of course, just League right now with the Zacian, and that of the Rillaboom doesn't want to deal with the Groudon right now. And then if you're going to be thinking about it, if there's also the Flower Gift from the side of Alexavier, then that's going to call for huge damages going against Jiseok Lee.
Yeah, Rillaboom here coming in for Alexavier. If he does want to have that boost from that fire type Heat Crash, he is going to have to get the Sun back out. It will still do a pretty good chunk of damage to either of these 2 Pokemon here, but now that Grassy Surge is back up, they will be regaining health, which is huge for that substituted Zacian here, especially because, it put up that substitute, it sat for several turns, and now that quarter of an HP that it used to set up that substitute is almost completely, completely restored now. So the Zacian looks really comfortable, and it hasn't really taken any damage yet to that substitute either. So if it's able to start getting off some moves here and sit pretty comfortably, it's going to be really, really important for Jiseok moving forward. Rillaboom instead goes for a Protect here on Jiseok's side, not wanting to deal with something like a fake out from the Rillaboom on Alexavier's side, who instead goes for a Grassy Glide, probably looking to break this substitute damage here, which it does not actually, and it goes for the Behemoth Blade instead, so that substitute's still staying in because it wasn't very effective. Goes for the Behemoth Blade into the Groudon that did not protect this turn. It is not enough to knock it out, but gets it into the bottom 25% of its HP while it's with a critical hit to boot. So a absolutely massive amount of damage, but the Heat Crash from this Groudon should be enough to easily knock this substitute out of the way here. So now the Zacian doesn't have the substitute, but it is pretty much all the way back up to its full HP here after dealing with, several turns of that grassy terrain health regeneration.
Right, but this is still looking pretty bad here for Alexavier. Not being able to take out that substitute. That's I believe that was a play for Alexavier here. By Rillaboom, of course, removing that substitute, and of course, Groudon hit crashing into that Zacian just to knock it out. But since that didn't work, of course, the substitute wasn't taken out by the Rillaboom, and of course, the hit crash was the one that took out the substitute. I think this is going to be quite bad for the side of Alexavier, as we saw how much of a damage that Behemoth Blade is going to be able to deal into that of the Groudon, and maybe even on the Charm if it decides if Alexavier decides to switch out. And of course, Rillaboom, we have another Rillaboom here, of course, for Jiseok Lee's side. So at this point on, it could be anyone's game.
Yeah, and having that Entei get knocked out because that Thunder Wave, it was really huge because you're not able to get something like a burn from that Sacred Fire onto either of these two Pokemon that wouldn't sit comfortably with it. Cherrim switches in here possibly just to take some heat from either of these two Pokemon. The Grassy Glide from the Rillaboom on Jiseok's side goes into the Cherrim. Isn't enough to knock it out because of not very effective damage, but the Behemoth Blade from the Zacian could go into either of these two Pokemon. If it goes into the Cherrim, that's a great switch in, but instead goes into the Rillaboom here. Is enough to knock it out. So you still actually, cleverly enough, you get the Groudon in, but then you have the Cherrim with the Flower Gift just to boost your attacks a little bit more, but then you do lose that fake out pressure from the Rillaboom on your side, but you may not even need it at this point, especially because this Zacian isn't up with a substitute right now. You need to start getting some big hits off onto it, and if this Cherrim knows something like Pollen Puff, it can get a ton of health back onto its partner Pokemon so that it can sit more comfortably in front of either of these two Pokemon, start firing things off like those Heat Crashes or those Precipice Blades. Even if you have that the Grassy Glide here, though, which could be probably most detrimental to either of the Pokemon on Alexavier's side, because both of these Pokemon don't have a ton of HP left. A Grassy Glide should be enough to finish off, I think, this Groudon pretty easily here. And then, if you're able to take out this Cherrim with almost any move, with actually really any move that the station runs, save for the substitute, right? And this is going to be a pretty comfortable wrap up here for Jiseok. Instead, the battle is canceled from Alexavier's side, knowing that he is not able to come back from that position. So really well done adjustments there from Jiseok. Really nice to see. You had that really interesting game. I think getting that Entei out of the game was important, even if you had to lose your Suicune to do it. That Suicune didn't put in a ton of work, but it did make Alexavier play around it. He did have to switch, had to be wary of Scalds, had to be wary of Tailwinds.
Right, that was a necessary sacrifice for Jiseok Lee to actually win that game, but now, seeing that adjustment coming from Jiseok Lee, I'm really wondering how Alexavier is going to be able to adjust from Jiseok Lee's side, knowing the fact that even without the Incineroar, even without worrying about that Intimidate, they were still able to prolong the game, make sure that Alexavier will do some mistakes here and there, and from there, of course, just be able to counter Alexavier's Groudon from there. And as you mentioned, that was quite huge as well, just to be able to take down that Entei. No, not even just taking down the Entei. I think the Thunder Wave alone was actually quite huge, especially with that RNG not being able to move at turn number 1 was quite huge for the side of Jiseok Lee. So right now, let's find out what's going to be the adjustment here for Alexavier. I wonder if they are going to be more aggressive than on game number 2, because we saw how aggressive Alexavier could get into on game number 1, right? So if we're going to be able to see that aggression once again into game number 3, I think Alexavier has a pretty good chance of winning against Jiseok Lee, knowing the fact that the composition here, the team composition, is definitely quite a counter pick for the side of Jiseok Lee's. But here we have it, game number 3, Alexavier Alvarez versus Jiseok Lee. Let's have a champion time.
Yeah, and my favorite lead here, that Groudon Charm, and then 2 dogs on the opposing side with that Suicune and that Zacian, so that Intrepid Sword. But then you do, of course, have the Sun going up here from that Groudon. So once again, getting that Flower Gift ability, like we've said a million times before at this point. But you do still have that Scald, which even though it's not doing as much damage in the Sun here, getting the ability to get a burn onto a Pokemon on either side here for Jiseok could be really nice, especially knowing that that Sacred Fire on that Entei could be getting the exact same type of thing onto you with some extra burn damage as well. So, not having a way to reset the weather can definitely be problematic, I think, for Jiseok, but he still has the option here to go for something like a Protect and a Tailwind pretty comfortably, and then maybe switch out, getting some of his Pokemon in the back that maybe slower than some of the other Pokemon, like this Incineroar could still be doing a ton of damage. The substitute actually here for the Zacian, so the Zacian goes for that substitute, getting comfortable like it did in that last game. Cherrim goes for a Solar Blade here. If this goes into the Suicune, it's going to be doing a massive amount of damage here, and if it goes into that substitute, we saw that it wasn't able to do a whole lot, so it may not be able to break it, but it instead goes into the Suicune. That is not enough for a one-hit knockout, though. Makes it live on just 20 HP. Suicune eats its berry here as well, just to gain back some of that HP that it had lost, that citrus berry. So Suicune goes for that Tailwind, boosting the Pokemon on his side of the field, but we do know that his Zacian is the fastest thing, while this Groudon is the slowest. Goes for a Precipice Blades into both of these Pokemon. It is enough to knock the Suicune out. Should be enough, I believe, to take out out that substitute, which it is. So that substitute not living like it did on that last game where it was crucial because that Zacian didn't take a heat crash. So now you're gonna have to see exactly what Jiseok brings in, but losing that Suicune, you know, was only able to get that Tailwind up. So we'll have to see if that is what's a really pivotal move for him to win this game 3.
Right, and see, this is what I'm talking about earlier before the start of game number 3. If we are going to see the aggression coming in from Alexavier from game number 1, then I think there's quite a huge chance for for Alexavier to actually get this round. But having that Tailwind as well, I think that is the only job here for Suicune. Of course, it would have been better to get that Skull, of course, to get that burn into that of the Groudon, or maybe even that of the Cherrim, but like that is its primary job, getting that speed control. But even then, as you mentioned, we already know that Zacian is the fastest one in the field. We have the Grassy Search as well coming in from the Rillaboom, of course. We have Grassy Glide, of course, a priority. But even without the Grassy Glide, of course, with the help of the Tailwind, it is still going to be the fastest one into that of the field. So the problem here is that even though Alexavier has a damage, if she's at least the fastest one, the faster one in this field, then what is Alexavier going to be able to do here?
Yeah, Alexavier switches his Groudon out though. May not want to take something like a Wood Hammer, knowing that that Rillaboom is faster, and the Cherrim goes for a Protect here, possibly just to cover that Fake Out. Zacian goes for a Behemoth Blade into the protected Cherrim slot, so this Rillaboom that just came in not taking that damage, but it will take Wood Hammer damage, like we said earlier, so that Rillaboom taking that Wood Hammer is still a super powerful move. Rillaboom on Jiseok's side does take that recoil damage, so now knowing that your Groudon is slower than all of the Pokemon on Jiseok's side, he could have just gone for something like a really good Wood Hammer here, you know, not worrying about taking any damage from a Heat Crash, maybe able to get that one-hit knockout because that Rillaboom is so strong as a Pokemon, and you're not sending anything in that can lower its attack. And you know, it is a physical attacker, so that special defense boost from that Flower Gift isn't really going to do a whole lot to help you there either. But now, you know, the Zacian's in a really great position. It can still go. It is probably still going to get faked out next turn, which you do have to be mindful of, which that fake out does come out. But this Rillaboom can still go for something really strong here. It just depends on what moves it's got. It does go again for that Wood Hammer, goes into the Cherrim slot, does a massive amount of damage, about 3/4 of the health there. It still takes a good chunk from the recoil. Cherrim goes for a Solar Blade into probably the Zacian here, especially after getting faked out, just to get a little bit of chip damage onto this Pokemon. Instead, it actually looks like it's going into the Rillaboom here, if I'm not mistaken, which it is. Does actually take the Rillaboom down to under half of its HP as well.
That was actually quite interesting. Alexavier going in for that Solar Blade into that other Rillaboom. But here's the thing though, like not lowering the HP for Zacian here is still going to allow it to go for another substitute, and of course anything that Alexavier would be able to do here is not going to remove that substitute, of course, unless we have still the Solar Blade up. But even then, the substitute is just going to be protecting the Zacian at that point. So right now we have Jiseok currently having the upper hand here against Alexavier.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, you know, that Tailwind isn't going to last forever. He doesn't have very many turns left with it, and he is only able to do just chip damage of not very effective type damage to all of the Pokemon on the field here with his own Rillaboom. You know, that Grassy Glide, even though it is priority, it doesn't really matter because he's in that Tailwind, so he can go for those big moves. Cherrim instead goes for a Protect here, though, not wanting to take any damage to get knocked out, trying to preserve it as long as it can. The Grassy Glide from the Rillaboom on Alexavier's side goes into the Rillaboom on Jiseok's side, does a good amount of damage, getting it down to the under 25% of its HP, but the Behemoth Blade here goes into the Rillaboom on Alexavier's side, and this should be enough to knock it out, which it is. So now not having to worry about that Rillaboom, gonna force back in one of the Pokemon on Alexavier's side, and if it is, you know, that Rillaboom going for that Wood Hammer into that protected Cherrim, but if it is, you know, going to have to be that Groudon, it's not going to be able to reset the Sun here, especially just based on how many turns the Sun has been up, and this Cherrim is only going to be able to survive with its Flower Gift ability for so long after this. The Tailwind, of course, also ends now too, so having that Suicune get knocked out at the end of that very first turn means you're not able to get out any more Tailwinds. The Entei instead comes out, going to capitalize on this turn of Sun here to be able to switch it out later with that Groudon in the back, but also live with this Flower Gift ability that its partner Cherrim is bringing, and hopefully going for some really powerful Sacred Fires into this Zacian.
Right, but at this point on, you know, like Flower Gift is not going to do a lot here for Entei. Of course, it's going to be increasing its attack and special defense, as we all know. Of course, Zacian and Rillaboom are both physical attackers here, so not quite of a boost here for Entei, but still let's find out if Entei is going to deal some damage here over that of the Sashan, or maybe even that of the Rillaboom. But I think the player, I think it would be best if they're going to be able to take down this Zashan quite early on. But look at that, Grassy Glide going to be able to take down that Cherrim, and of course Flare Blitz right now is going into that of the Zashan, not going to have any more threats for this side of Alexavier. Of course, now that we do have NC, you know, we do see the Groudon, of course, coming up right now as the Cherrim goes down. Doesn't have any tailwind at this point coming in from Jiseok's side. So at this point, you know, Alexavier could just confidently just get some attack here going into that of Jiseok's side. And of course, with the Landorus, of course, your force ability, I think it could still deal a lot of damage going against that of the Groudon, but still they have to think about the Entei as well.
Yeah, this Entei, of course, like you said, able to get those moves off like Sacred Fire. I think Landorus is the best Pokemon that Jiseok could possibly have in the back. But, you know, the fact that he isn't able to go for any more fake outs because that Rillaboom has sat on the field for so long, he hasn't been positioning it in and out. So this Landorus, you know, this Landorus is only going to be able to go for a Heat Crash if it wants to knock out... this Groudon is only going to be able to go for a Heat Crash if it wants to knock out this Landorus, right? Because that Precipice Blades isn't going to be able to do any damage here. But the Earth Power from this Landorus means that it is able to at least get possibly one turn of damage off into that Groudon and do a really massive amount, unless this Entei is able to Sacred Fire knock out this Rillaboom. You know, the Rillaboom could also go for something like a Priority Glassy Glide here into this Groudon slot, which would still do a really massive amount of damage. Not enough to knock it out, though. Gets it down to about 3/4 of its health. Entei goes for that Flare Blitz, though, that we saw it use earlier. Goes into the Landorus slot, is not enough to knock it out either, and that Landorus is the biggest threat on that team there. Landorus goes for an Earth Power, though, into the Entei slot, is enough to knock out the Entei. So this should actually be enough here, because this Groudon can't knock out both of these Pokemon at once, right? It goes for the Heat Crash. It could go into either one of these Pokemon and knock them out, but you do have the priority from the Grassy Glide, which actually the Rillaboom is the one knocked out here, but we saw that Earth Power moves first. So that Earth Power should be enough to knock out that Groudon, especially if this Landorus, you know, is able to get all of that damage off, and there is no more grassy terrain as well on the field now.
Right, so I was thinking if Alexavier actually took off the Landorus first, of course, we're not going to be able to see any priority moves coming in from Jiseok, of course, from that off the Rillaboom, but still, you know, now that I think about it, it doesn't even matter at that point. Since the Groudon is the slowest one into that of the field, whatever happened, whatever Pokemon that they might have been able to take down is just going to be quite detrimental for their end. And of course, that is just going to be the game here for Jiseok, and really huge props for Jiseok for being able to turn it around despite having the bad matchup going against Alexavier Álvarez.
Yeah, so like you said, actually, right before Game 3 started, where you said you were hoping for possibly a more offensive Game 3 from Jiseok, that's exactly what he gave us. You know, he left that Grimmsnarl behind. He didn't even get any screens up in Game 2, where he still won. Or he didn't even get any screens up in that game too, so he knew that he knew that he didn't really need them, right? You know, he knew having that Thunder Wave was nice, but having that Landorus kept in the back as your hidden piece of knowledge, you know, because you haven't brought it yet, but you know that Landorus is so good against so many Pokemon on Alexavier's team. You know that Groudon can't hit it with its Precipice Blades, which is its main primary form of damage output. So having that sent in, you know, means that you can't double target both Pokemon, and that Rillaboom, of course, another threat to that Groudon as well. So having all of those Pokemon, you know, just slowly going and chipping away, but getting yourself into that end game where you can protect the Landorus and send it in right at the end, where it can do enough damage onto either one of these Pokemon, is huge. And you knew that you had to take out that Entei that turn, but instead of the Groudon, because if you took out the Entei, then you knew that Groudon couldn't knock out both of your Pokemon, whereas the Entei might have been able to do so. So really great gameplay by Jiseok there, and of course really great adaptations. Alexavier, of course, had a great game, had a team that I absolutely loved, so it was a little heartbreaking for me to see that Cherrim, but you know, absolutely great game plan.
Right, and of course, speaking of absolute great plans, we are going to see more of these great plans when we come back for our next game, only here at Victory Road World Cup of Pokemon VGC. Don't go anywhere. We'll